Okay.
Okay. So what do we call that, Cam? What was that was going on with our puppy?
Reverse sneezing.
Reverse sneezing.
Apparently, it's a normal thing for tiny
For
doggies.
tiny dogs with little snub noses, which is exactly what we have right now. So we're new
doggy.
to a dog breed this small, and definitely new to snub noses. Maxie has a very long snout. So we're just kind of figuring things out, and he's fine. Reverse sneezing is apparently a very normal thing for these type of breeds. So we just need to get used to it and figure out a good method to kind of stop the spasm, which is exactly what it is. So he probably had something lodged in there or whatever. So he's fine now. He's sitting right here. And if anything happens in the meantime, we just won't show you this recording. But I think it's going to be fine. Okay. So we were doing my pitch. This will be the last thing that we'll do. We're going to post this in the comments, probably. I think is the idea. Okay. So here's my pitch for Back to the Future Part 4. Modern day Marty McFly, meaning 2020, now owns and runs a record store specializing in vinyl. He tried but never broke through in music. Helping him run the store, along with his wife Jennifer, is a 20-something new character named Julia, a young musician who loves working at the vinyl store but knows that it's just barely making ends meet. She's gained a lot of emotional connection with Marty and his wife. Marty and his wife, their kids have gone on to college and they've moved away and all that, but Julia is still connected to them because Marty was a musician himself, all this other stuff. So Julia and her mother don't get along. Her mother is overbearing. We find out it's because her mother's father was killed. That's Julia's grandfather, was killed when Julia's mother was very young. This, plus the passing of her husband at a young age, have left the mother feeling very overprotective of her only child, who is now 20-something Julia and an adult. Okay? So, all right, so the plot is set in motion by George passing away. George passes away, and Marty struggles to eulogize a man who, because of his time travel antics with Doc Brown, realizes that he barely knew the father that just passed. Basically, all the changes that happened because Marty changed in 1955. He struggles to actually figure out who this man is that his siblings are talking about. He has none of the memories that they do. And so it kind of leaves him feeling like he barely knew his own father. At the graveside, Marty swears to Jennifer and Julia that he sees a young George, about 30-something, standing amongst the mourners. No one believes him, thinking it was only emotion getting the best of him, until later when Lorraine says that she spoke to young George. So Lorraine, who is also much older now, she's kind of geriatric, says that she spoke to young George. And the only thing that he asked her at that moment was, any regrets? That's the phrase he said, any regrets? And she said, absolutely none. Okay? So Marty realizes at this point, because his mother has revealed that she also that she not only saw George but spoke to him, realizes that it's possible that his father could in fact be traveling through time. So he walks the old Hill Valley City Square thinking about this and trying to contemplate everything, walks in front of the clock tower. And a concerned Julia has followed him because, again, she's emotionally connected to both him and Jennifer. She's kind of tracking him because he seems to be acting very odd. He thinks that he saw his old man at the funeral. So she follows him. And after being caught, after Julia gets caught by Marty, she asks questions of what he's doing there. So Marty shows her a picture of the original clock tower from 1885 when Doc and himself were standing in front of it. It's a picture that Doc gives him at the end of Back to the Future Part 3 as a commemoration thing. Like, I love you, the son I never had, basically. So
that's the Old West one?
Mm-hmm. So Marty tells her the story basically of everything that happened in the first movie. Everything happened, kind of the basic idea. I traveled through time. There was a DeLorean, and she's kind of taking it in. During this discussion, a dapper-looking 30-year-old man, dapper, by the way, fun word, right?
Dapper. Dapper Dan.
He's dressed out of his time. He approaches them. He asks if he is in fact Marty McFly. He says they've met before. And then he introduces himself as Vern. Vern is a character that was introduced at the end of Back to the Future Part 3. It is Doc Brown's son. With Doc Brown stayed behind in 1885 and actually fathered two sons that we know of with Mary Steenburgen's character. and and so we meet Vern. He's a little boy when we first see him on this locomotive time travel device. But this is a grown-up, an adult, 30-something Vern. And he says his father sent him from his deathbed in 1920 because he needs to speak to Marty one last time. He has a confession to make. So it's going to be a deathbed confession from Doc Brown.
Dun dun dun.
Dun, dun, dun. They jump because we're dealing with different forms of automobile at the time. They jump into a Model T Ford, because it's 1920s, retrofitted with a flux capacitor to see old Doc. Whenever they get there, Doc tells Marty of his greatest regret. He, in fact, built a time machine before 1985 and never told Marty. Okay. Because of his exposure to the technology back in 1955, whenever Marty brought the time machine to him and showed him everything, he was able to build a working prototype by 1964. But it was stolen, and he's not sure by whom. Okay? So Marty is able to put two and two together and realizes that it's his father who has taken the time machine. And that's how he saw him at the funeral. So he, Julia, and Vern set off to 1964 to try to stop his father from stealing the time machine and possibly corrupting the space-time continuum. So along the way, there will be a lot of fish out of water bits involving the Roaring Twenties, and as well as the British invasion 60s. Specifically, Julia kind of dealing with all of that kind of stuff. She's a child of today, and so she may not have a whole lot of information about the Roaring Twenties or the 60s. I don't know. And we also find out that Julia is in fact related to Vern. I say child now, by the way, she's 20-something, but either way. Let's find out that Julia is in fact related to Vern. She was named after Jules, her great uncle. So that makes Vern her great grandfather, or great grandfather. We find out that they're related through some stuff that goes on that I do have planned. This is all actually planned. And the death of her grandfather, which of course just happened to occur in 1964, becomes a third act ticking clock that they have to prevent. Okay. Now here's where the emotional crux of the story kind of hits. Okay. Eventually, it all comes down to a choice of preventing the death of Julia's grandfather or stopping George from stealing the time machine. Okay. Eventually Marty has to make this decision, and they save the grandfather, and George disappears in the time machine, but then quickly just reappears right back. And now he recognizes Marty, this man who has been chasing him this entire time. He's able to recognize Marty as his son, because we find out what George is actually doing. He's terrified of becoming a father. And so in an effort, because he knows, he eventually started following Doc Brown after his interaction with Marty, because he saw that Marty was around Doc Brown a lot, and started to investigate and realized that Doc Brown had created this time machine. George steals the time machine and travels forward in time to the future to see how he parents. He's so terrified he decides that's how he's going to figure it out.
If he can do it.
If he can do it. And so he stops in, and we see in different moments him stopping in at key parts of Marty's life. And eventually he comes back. And eventually he winds up at his own funeral and whispers any regrets to his wife, who then tells him none whatsoever. And he's able to come back and realize that he can live without regret. He can be a good father. And Marty basically looks at him and says, I could have told you that. I'm happy. You were a good father, because here I am. I was able to raise a family. I'm able to do something that I love. I've got good people, and I'm a decent person. And that's partially because of you, at least. So you were obviously good. And he goes, I just wish that I had known you, because of the situation that I had where I can't remember anything anymore. And George looks at him and says, well, the good news is that I already know who you are. He goes, and the other good news is that I got some time. So they sit, and Marty gets to talk with his dad And we don't see it. We don't see the conversation. But Marty is able to talk with his father, who has already passed on in the timeline that Marty understands. And he gets to have his final moment. He gets to have some final moments with his dad, where he really gets to hash out who that man eventually became. The man before he became a father, who that guy was. We get to come back, and number one, they destroy that time machine that George stole, and they come back to the present. And so the other thing that's kind of nice about this is that Marty and Doc Brown are still together, but in this particular case, because Julia is in fact a descendant of Doc Brown, because she's Vern's great granddaughter. Mm-hmm. So it's now Brown and McFly together again, but in this case we've actually reversed the ages. It's kind of interesting, and you can continue on the story. If you wanted to make sequels to this, you could. So that's Back to the Future Part 4. It's got some holes in it. Those would be fleshed out as I wrote it, but this was just an idea that I had. I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and decided that I needed to type this out. So I hope that you liked it. It's a nice little Father's Day edition, by the way, not intentional. I just have my own father issues that I have to purge occasionally, and it comes out in my writing. But I hope you enjoyed it. Our puppy is fine. He's right here. He's resting. He's smiling.
Breathing like a normal puppy.
Breathing like a normal puppy. And
no more reverse sneezing.
No more reverse sneezing. Now we know that is not as scary.
Yes.
But thank you guys for hanging in there with this, and we love you, and we'll talk to you later. Keep on jamming.